Well, here with us today is Dr. J. Derek Kingsley. Yes, he's a professor in the School of Health Sciences within the Department of Exercise Science and Physiology at Kent State University. He's a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine, a certified exercise physiologist, and a certified strength and conditioning coach with distinction from the National Strength and Conditioning Association. Now, Dr. Kingsley, his area of research is autonomic modulation and vascular changes in response to resistance exercise and resistance exercise training in healthy individuals and those with chronic diseases. His research has primarily encompassed improving quality of life in women with fibromyalgia using resistance exercise, but also alternative medicine such as chiropractic care and low-level laser therapy. He also looked at the effects of resistance exercise and alternative resistance exercise. We're talking about the heavy battle rope, uh, kettlebells, and all those things on autonomic modulation, vascular function, and cognition. And he's looking at the use of cannabis as an ergogenic aid. And so today, Dr. Kingsley is with us today. He will discuss his new research looking at the use of cannabis, or as we say in layman's term, marijuana, okay, as an ergogenic aid. And he's going to look at its effectiveness and safety with the use of the safety of its use with athletes or just for any individuals who wants to go out there, exercise, and improve their performance, their energy levels, and their strength.
Ooh, I'm
So,
going to correct you there before we get going. And we don't look at performance. I think the data are pretty clear that there's no performance benefit, but we look at it as means of recovery.
recovery, that's it. Okay. So we're going to be looking at how well you recover from exercise with the use of cannabis. So, guess what? That's a lot of stuff I said about my home friend. Yes, it just enjoy you and all the great things that you're doing in the exercise science and physiology department at Kent State. And so we're so glad that you are here to tell us, the audience, Dr. D. Banks, we're happy to talk about cannabis.
Cannabis.
We are, yes.
I
And
don't know if that's a good word, cannabis. We have to be careful when we talk about that because we don't want to seem too excited.
no, but that I want to be clear here. But I think what's so funny about that, doctors, is that we still talk about it behind closed doors. But that is not necessarily where we are anymore, right?
Right, that's right.
Recreational, and we're number 28 on the list to have recreational. But of those 28 recreational cannabis states, I think only 2 or 3 allow for public consumption. And Ohio is one that does not. So even as a state regarding cannabis, we're still behind locked doors, locked windows. And like you stated, people are scared to talk about it, but I could go down the road and go buy almost as much cannabis as I want legally with 21 years old and plus.
So,
Wow.
Dr. Derek, with what you just said, I guess I'm confused, and this isn't part of your talk. So, as opposed to when I'm in New York or California, we still can't go down the street smoking marijuana.
That is not true. In California, they don't have the no public policy. So in California, you're allowed to consume it anywhere and everywhere. Case in point, when I was in San Diego, I went down to the beach when we were there for ACSM, and there was a surfer there, and he pulled out a 3-foot water bong out of his bag and sat there on the beach pulling on this 3-foot water bong.
Wow.
Wow.
When we talk about, I know a friend of mine calls it the Boulder breeze, right? We get that whiff in the air and you're looking around like, who's that?
Right.
And in Colorado, it's illegal to puff or to consume cannabis in public. And even in Massachusetts as well, most states, it's listed as, if you are caught consuming cannabis out in the open, it's listed as a ticketable offense.
Mm.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
And so what I've done is every time I travel to a state that has cannabis, I always interview at least 2 people at a dispensary and a local police officer,
Oh, wow.
ideas about how their state is handling it and how things are.
Right. Excellent. Excellent.
Well, because I'm building a knowledge base, and I think, as we're all aware, the reason we got into this work is that the knowledge base is non-existent.
Yes. Yes.
When I talked to the officer in Colorado, and he was like, "The issue is everybody around here consumes it, so we don't enforce it. We list the consumption of cannabis in public almost as a blue law," is what the young man said.
Okay. Wow.
Like, I don't enforce it because there's no point, because everybody that's here is probably walking around getting high. He's like, there's
Yeah,
no
the
point.
blue laws, I remember in North Carolina when they didn't sell alcohol on Sunday,
Correct.
because
Yeah,
they had the blue laws, right?
or Indiana, no alcohol on Sunday, or no alcohol until 1 o'clock when church lets out.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Right. And then you can get stoned after church.
Well, you just go outside of church. just can't do it on the steps of the church. You got to do it in your car before you go.
Right.
And then go in, right?
Right.
Massachusetts, the guy was like, I only write tickets if they blow it in my face. Like if I say
Okay.
out, he or she turns and blows my face, $175 ticket on the spot.
Right.
In New York, the cops said the same thing. The cops were like, there's
Huh.
smoking pot for me to ticket everybody, so we don't bother enforcing it.
Huh.
And in Michigan, there's also, to my understanding, no public consumption law. So in Michigan, you can smoke it anywhere and everywhere, and it's no longer listed as illegal. Here in the city of Kent, last year in November, we voted on public consumption. So cannabis in the city of Kent is also no longer listed as a ticketable offense. Because Kent has all these music things that are happening outside, like the Beatles Fest, the Jazz Fest. There's probably 4 or 5 music festivals that happen in downtown Kent, and it always smells like cannabis, and it's no longer enforced by the city police.
Right.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So that means if I went to a George Clinton, I think y'all saw me posting it on Facebook. Just maybe what, April, May, I can't remember. It was this year. And so I was sitting in the back, and it was just a blue haze all over the whole place. And I was like, well, they can't enforce nothing now, even though at that time it wasn't really legal, because it just became legal in Ohio when, like last week, like
Yeah,
August the 6th.
Yeah, the 6th, Tuesday. So a
Yeah.
week ago yesterday.
Yeah. So yeah, that's very interesting how we're coming up to new things when it comes to marijuana. But yeah, let's backtrack. Let's backtrack. Dr. Derek, that's what I say, Derek. Let's tell the audience, because you are an exercise physiologist, you're a researcher, you do that within the Department of Kent State, and so I always like to open up those fellow colleagues like you, tell your journey into getting into exercise phys and all that, so that they can see how we're exercise physiologists, but we do different things, but we all still are the same, right? So
Well,
start out.
and
Tell
again, to be clear, that's almost another podcast in itself. So I'll try
Yes.
and keep things short. So I graduated high school at 88 pounds on a 6-foot frame. I was a heavy, heavy cigarette smoker, probably 3 to 5 packs a day.
Really?
Yep. I went to college. I got kicked out of college due to my first year. I could not get a GPA above 0.08.
I remember that GPA from one of my kids. I couldn't calculate that many D's and F's and C's. That was beyond my mathematics. I said, you know what? I don't know how to do this mathematics of a 0.0 something.
Yep, that was me. I took the highest grade I got my freshman year was a D+. That was the only passing grade I got. I was biology major. I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. Somebody was like, have you thought about another pathway? And my mom and I was like, you're crazy. She was like, do some digging. I did some digging. I was biology, so I wanted to find something that allowed me to use all those credits. And what allowed that to occur was exercise science. I had to go talk to the dean. And again, this is 1993. 95, 96. So my hair is probably down to my waist. I'm wearing 3 levels of flannel because I'm living the Seattle grunge scene. I got cigarettes all over me. I probably smell like smoke and cannabis walking around campus. The dean was like, I'm going to make you take this class 7:30 a.m., 5 days a week,
Oh my God.
physical conditioning. So that class started on January 7th, 1997. We had to write down our goals. And again, I got long hair. I think my hair at the time was almost in dreads. It was so thick because I've been on tour with the Grateful Dead for about a year. So there was showering was kind of a secondary point. I wrote down my goals. She made us read them to the class. I'm going to stop smoking. I'm going to cut my hair. I'm going to change my entire life and start exercising. And those people in that room, there was an uproar of laughter that I can still hear today. At the end of that class, I went to my girlfriend and she was like, "You're an idiot. Of course you're never going to do those goals. They have every right to laugh at you. Screw you." We broke up right then. I went home, burned all my flammable, shaved my head, went to the gym, and pulled a 4.0 from that time on.
Wow.
My undergrad mentor was like, "Have you thought about science?" He introduced me to some new methodologies utilizing a metabolic cart. We collected data on Lance Armstrong training for the Tour de France while he was riding up the side of a mountain. I was hooked to the back of a truck with a Douglas bag, if you remember those.
Yes, I remember those.
I worked as a personal trainer as part of my internship. I was a personal trainer for about 4 years but the issue there was a woman that came to my gym that had a disease, fibromyalgia. There was no data on what to do with her in the gym. So I told her I would go back and write and come up with some ideas about strength training for women with fibromyalgia. That individual was my mother. That was 1999 when she was diagnosed. I went back and did my master's thesis and my doctoral dissertation on resistance exercise and complementary and alternative medicine on fibromyalgia. And now when you look at the ACSM guidelines on testing and exercise prescription, the 3 articles they reference to build their prescription is based on Kingsley et al.
Oh, wow.
I fulfilled my goal to my mother. I did a lot of fibromyalgia work at my first job at Indiana State. I was there 4 years, and then I transitioned over here to Kent State. My sister is chair in biology. She's been here 19 years. She moved here with a newborn and a 3-year-old. My parents bought the house across the street. I now live next to my parents and a block from my sister.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's the wonderful story of Dr. J. Derek. Yes.
That's a great
It's kind of
story.
ruthless. Exercise science was not what I was thinking. I was 88-pound heavy smoker. I know when I got to 100 pounds, I thought I was the biggest badass in the world. And I was 100 pounds. I thought I was so big.
Well, we have a friend, Dr. Lolita McDavid, says you can't have a testimony without a test. Seems like you have had yours.
Well, my parents, I think, weren't sure I would ever graduate college, much less get a PhD.
Wow, that's a good
So you
story.
proved them wrong, and that's a wonderful story.
And like you said, here at Kent State, we, a long-term intervention, going for tenure with more research becomes more difficult, right? Because if you're doing an intervention, that means you're putting out 1 to 2 pubs a year. And, certainly being here and having a PhD program, I wanted to do more. So a lot of our studies now have been more acute, looking at acute resistance exercise, free weights and weight machines. We've also done a lot of blood flow restricted exercise, looking at autonomic and vascular function. We've done, like you said, the alternative exercise, the heavy battle rope. We've done 2 or 3 studies with that, looking at blood flow and autonomic and vascular function. And then during COVID, when everything kind of came to an end, I was like, what are we going to do? And somebody was like, I was working out at the rec center today, and I think people on both sides of me had just smoked a joint because all I could smell was cannabis. So maybe we should look at cannabis and exercise. And I was like, here at the time, that was during COVID. So Ohio did have medicinal.
Yes, it did.
I think medicinal here rolled out in 2018 or 2019 prior to COVID. And I was like, that's a really interesting point. So we sat down as a crew during COVID and wrote a questionnaire looking at who was using cannabis before, during, and after exercise. Because another student of mine was running ultra marathons, and she said she was at a tent, like at the halfway point, and said, "I have a headache. Does anybody have a Tylenol or an Advil?" And everybody presented her an edible, but nobody had an Advil or Tylenol.
Wow.
So we really try to get an idea about where are people using cannabis before, during, or after. And then when we ran that study, we had about 400, 500 people respond. And from that, we really focused on looking at cannabis from recovery, because a few people said, yeah, they did it beforehand. Some did it during, but majority, everybody in that study was using cannabis regularly and exercising regularly, all 400, 500 subjects, and almost all of them are using cannabis afterwards. So we really focused on looking at that data from a recovery standpoint. Because if we define an ergogenic aid, I think, Vicki, Dr. Doe, you're exactly right. We usually think performance, right? Creatine, steroids, HMB is probably more recovery, but caffeine, we just finished a caffeine study looking at it as an ergogenic aid for performance with weight training, in fatigue, but really, if you look at the data on cannabis, there's no effect on exercise performance across the board. It really doesn't show to have any effect with performance based. So when we think about an ergogenic aid from our perspective, an ergogenic aid is supposed to help you recover from exercise. And recovery from exercise has 3 primary hallmarks, one of which is better sleep. So you can recover. Reductions in inflammation, right? So you can recover. And reductions in pain. These are the 3 things that really dictate recovery from exercise, and from looking at the literature. And when we look at the literature with cannabis, cannabis has been purported to do all 3 of those things: improve sleep, reduce pain, reduce inflammation. So we've really started to work and think about, are people using cannabis as an ergogenic aid? And I think that answer is yes, regarding recovery.
Can we go back and do refresh definitions for me and for the audience in terms of just the base term ergonomics? Is that the base term?
Ergogenic.
Ergogenic. Okay. So can we define what ergogenic is?
Yeah, ergogenic is, can you improve performance of exercise or improve exercise recovery, is the definition of an ergogenic aid. And most supplements that are out there for the general population, like I said, creatine, HMB, caffeine, even protein supplementation, are geared towards making you a better participant of exercise, like reductions in fatigue during the exercise, or helping you recover from that exercise accordingly. Certainly, if we think about like creatine, I mean, that's muscle swelling, an increase in water mass within that individual sarcomere, but also now I've seen improvements in cognition, making you a better lifter, even caffeine, reducing fatigue, all these things are defined as ergogenic. But even like protein supplementation or HMB is allowing you to recover faster from that exercise bout, and are also listed as ergogenic aids. So we had a list of ergogenic aids. I think we had like 30 things in the list, and in addition to cannabis, and a lot of those individuals were doing cannabis along with creatine, protein supplementation, multivitamins, and trying to find out ways to be the best exerciser they could. And some were athletes, but when we look at the literature, athletes, and certainly those that are NCAA, are probably scared to talk about cannabis because they worry about their scholarships, and if they do get tested, what does that mean? But you got to remember, the NCAA, I think in February of 2022, doubled the amount of THC that they were testing for in those athletes. It used to be 90 milligrams, and then the new ruling came out in February of 2022, and it took it to 175 milligrams of THC in your system to be able to test positive. That's a lot more cannabis or THC in your system. And again, for definitions, cannabis can be defined in 2 different ways: CBD, cannabidiol, and then THC, the tetrahydrocarbon, delta 9. And the cannabidiol doesn't have any psychoactive effects, but still has effects in your body, binding to CB receptors, CB1 and CB2, more in your spinal cord and peripheral nervous system, like your skeletal muscle. Whereas THC, the tetrahydrocarbon, tends to bind more really in your spinal cord and in your brain. So it tends to have more psychoactive effects, the stone, the high, the buzz, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, in the literature, we tend to call it euphoric state because we don't want to have high like in our publication, right? Because
Right.
less science.
Nah.
In our lab, like I'm really cautious about the language we use. We always say cannabis, because I don't want something. Oh yeah, we're talking about weed in the lab today. No, we're not. That's a little slangy. We're talking about cannabis or marijuana, not weed, not reefer.
It's like, how's that research doing there? How you doing?
But again, and as we all know, I mean, weed certainly has a, dare I say, negative connotation associated with it, right?
Yeah.
And even, smoking pot, well, that makes you a pothead. Well, does it? But again, that pothead again has a distinct delineation and a connotation, denotation with it, right? You're thinking long hair, you're thinking dirty hippie. That's not true anymore because it's recreational or medicinal in 39 states.
Right. Yes. So we've come a long ways, and I like how, because it has always, cannabis has always had that healing effect with it. So it's now time for us to research it and say what it can and can't do. And so that's why we are glad that you have embraced that. But I'm gonna go out.
Right.
I'm-
Right, for better or for worse, because I know somebody like at ACSM this year, there was one presentation on cannabis, and it was me, and I was by myself.
Oh, wow.
Last year there was 6. We had our own poster session,
yeah.
CBD, cannabidiol, but this year I was the only one out of all the, I think, 8,500 people at ACSM. I was the only one that had cannabis in the title.
Yeah, but
Mm.
that's what I was going to ask you too. How is that taken, that doing that research, how is it taken in just in our community at Kent State and all that? Is it looked upon like, ooh, that's what you doing, or what? Yeah, okay.
A little bit of both. I get random questions sometimes like, hey, so if I smoke this joint, I'm going to sleep better? And the answer is I have no idea
Right.
because everybody responds differently.
Uh-huh.
But now that I have cannabis like in my repertoire, like I got a call from the Cuyahoga County Juvenile Detention Center, or in the court in Cleveland is having me come in and talk to their judges and to their juvenile detention center about brain development in teenagers that are using cannabis, because the medicinal side of things is 18 plus, whereas the recreational is 21 plus. But a lot of the kids in the detention center are 15, 16 using cannabis, and they want to know what effects might this have on the long term, so they can then talk to these young individuals based on the more recent data that's come out regarding brain development in younger individuals that dictate the 21 plus here in the state of Ohio.
Dr. Derek, so I have a question. So I remember when I went to the Netherlands first in 1990, whatever it was, two. And marijuana and hashish and all that were very freely used.
Yep.
So are you getting any, is there old data that you're getting from? Did they do any research, as I say, in the Netherlands about the use of this and those kinds of things that you're talking about, like right now, brain development and all of that? Because this was what, 32 years ago.
And I think the Netherlands has had recreational cannabis in their coffee shops for almost 50, 60 years. And unfortunately, there's no data collection from that.
Oh, wow.
My comment to individuals is the data I'm collecting now probably should have been collected 50 years ago.
Wow. Okay.
But
Yeah.
it wasn't.
It wasn't. Yeah.
Now, what's funny is there was a publication in 1971 in Medicine Science. This was what Medicine and Sport and Science and Exercise, MSSE, is now. So ACSM published a manuscript on looking at, they gave them a 10 milligram joint that they had to smoke. And then they measured heart rate and blood pressure in response to that. And then ACSM published it. And that was 1971. And that was one of 5 publications in the 70s about THC and marijuana.
Wow.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah. So with that said, then, you said that you're looking at recovery when it comes to the use of cannabis.
Yep.
So What have you discovered so far? What have you
Well,
discovered?
and again, I want to be clear here. We've been doing questionnaires. We getting some cannabis stuff through our IRB is always going to be a challenge. And in talking to our IRB, we have to remember that cannabis is still listed as a Schedule 1 narcotic. It's on the same list as heroin. I think MMDA, ecstasy is on that list as well. Cocaine is a Schedule 2 because they use it in hospitals. So even though we have statewide medicinal for 5 or 6 years and recreational for 10 days, it's still listed as a Schedule 1 narcotic. So getting that through our IRB for me to do some THC testing in the lab until that gets rescheduled is probably not going to happen. In 2018, CBD was taken from a Schedule 1 down to a Schedule 3. That means CBD was listed as over the counter.
Okay.
But even then, that's not true. I can go online. I can order CBD on Amazon. That means hell, it'll be here in like 20 minutes.
Right.
Every state but Idaho. Idaho is the only state in the United States that does not allow sale of CBD in their state whatsoever. They have banned CBD and THC. So Amazon will not ship CBD to Ohio or to Idaho whatsoever.
Wow.
So the CBD products are the ones that you see in these nutrition stores. They don't have THC like the creams that you rub on or all the millions of things. So that's the CBD without the THC.
Correct. THC is only sold in dispensaries.
Okay. And these are legal in most places, the CBDs.
CBD is legal in every state but Idaho.
Okay.
Idaho.
THC is now legal in 39 states.
Okay. Wow. So
we only have a few left, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's creeping up there. It's creeping up.
And what's left is, dare I say, some of the Southeast, North Carolina, South Carolina. I think we'll have some new votes in November of this year where states are looking to get medicinal or otherwise. But even Mississippi and Alabama have a medical program. Georgia has an oil you can buy, but no more than 3% THC, so it's real low level. And these are our most conservative states, but South Carolina and North Carolina, no recreational or medical program, but even West Virginia has a medical program. Even Louisiana has a medical program.
Wow.
There's a few scattered states in the Midwest, like North Dakota, South Dakota don't have programs. Idaho, Wyoming, I think now has recreational. So we're still seeing an upswing, and with 39 states having it legal, at some point in time, whoever's in charge, certainly Biden keeps talking about rescheduling it, but that hasn't happened yet. And I don't know with an election year what that means about the rescheduling of cannabis from a Schedule 1 down to a Schedule 3 or a Schedule 4 to allow the state some more flexibility. Because now since it's against federal law to contain cannabis, the Schedule 1 drug, legally you're not allowed to carry it across states. But I think we all know that's not true. Right. Because if you go to Toledo, what I see is a sign that says, that's on the Michigan-Ohio border, that's like, welcome Ohioans, come here and buy your marijuana to go home. But that's completely illegal based on federal law, but they're advertising.
That's trafficking. Isn't that technically trafficking?
But the name of the dispensary is called On the Border.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So they built it because people from here were driving 3 hours to go get recreational marijuana because they weren't because Ohio, up until last week, has been a medicinal state. There are 36 conditions on a list. And if you can show that you have tried other alternative methods to treat these conditions and they have been unsuccessful, you can get an Ohio medical marijuana card.
Dr. Derek, I see where this is going because I remember back in the 60s when I went to school in Oxford, Ohio. You know where Oxford is, where Miami is? Mm-hmm. There was a town on the border between Indiana and Ohio that was just like that. Oxford was dry, Indiana was dry, but there was that line border where about 50 of us would get in somebody's car and drive out to College Corner and get whatever wine they had that was aged 3 seconds ago. So I see where this is going. That's exactly what they did. It was illegal in both states, but like you said, there was that border town which College Corner was, where we went and got that stuff.
But
Yeah.
they were also, again, just like the dispensary on the border, they're advertising for you because they know you have nowhere to go get alcohol, right?
Exactly.
But you got to remember, like when Colorado passed recreational marijuana like 20 some odd years ago, the influx into that state from people going there to take advantage of it for medical and or recreational purposes was a bloom. But then the issue was they would have these cars that would have like 10,000 chocolate bars in them crossing the border into, like Nevada or whatever else over there, and they would get caught and it was illegal. And then that's, so we haven't gotten away from that yet, right? It's still federally illegal. So these dispensaries, in my understanding, like can't do a lot with banks because of that, right? Because banks are FICA, which is owned by the federal government, and the federal government says this is an illegal substance. So by it not being fairly regulated or keeping it as a Schedule 1, we're limiting the ability to have more dispensaries and more options of having THC in these other states because they're like, well, look at the federal government says no.